For another one of our unit dreaming episodes. So here we go. We're going spark of inspiration for a unit all the way to unit outline. We're going to use a template that you can get your hands on. So we're going to go right to it. Unit dreaming spark that I have posted. By the way, hashtag unit dreaming on Twitter or LinkedIn. You can find any of these that you want to use in the future. Feel free to grab them and use them. This is from Charmaine Wilkerson's novel Black Cake, which is an amazing book. And this is just a screenshot of the page. So this piece that I highlighted here, she's talking about, the character talking about this book on stories that she created surrounding traditional recipes. So here she talks about food often was about who had colonized whom, who had been based where during wartime, who had been forced to feed what to their children when there was nothing else left. And of course it was about geography too. So I'm thinking about, all the possibilities in this, and I might go ahead and copy the image and just bring it over into our little template here. So you can have access to the staff meeting agenda, and in it, there's a planning template with all these live links. So for your inspiration, I would just add it here. So now I have it. So I have my inspiration here. And the next thing I want to do, and this is from Dr. Golnasar Mohammed's Hill framework, identity, criticality, and joy, I think are the 3 of the 5 she talks about that are most overlooked. So let's start there. When we think about identity, we think about the maybe nation, culture, specifically food. We think about, so we have national identity, kind of like cultural identity, specifically the food that you eat. We might think about our identity as just like part of even like a hyper-local community. We might think about our identity in terms of like socioeconomic status, kind of like, I'm not sure what I want to say here. Like not war adjacent, but like who is experiencing some sort of like regional conflict that impacts kind of like the way that you eat or something, right? So I think all of these pieces are part of it. Criticality. So when we think about like capitalism, we can think of cultural appropriation of food. So capitalism meaning, like whose resources are taken. I'm thinking kind of like resource allocation, fair pay versus exploitation of workers. What else? Maybe just like what is seen as good food or what is seen as like typical food versus like exoticized food or fetishized food. I think that's related to cultural appropriation, but I wonder if there's some sort of like what is the thing, what is seen as typical and then gets like airtime, right? Or like is seen in popular media. So actually, one of the things I have listened to a Code Switch episode about this, and it was talking about like publishing cookbooks. So like the publishing industry, and we could look at cookbooks specifically. I might pull in that Code Switch episode if I was actually teaching this unit. Can't remember what it's called off the top of my head, but I could Google it. And then in terms of joy, so like the love of food. We could also talk about the like heritage of food or like passing down recipes in a family. So also kind of like traditions usually bring joy. We have kind of the injustices that are present around food communities, food deserts, food apartheid, the unfair pay of workers. So also trying to find justice so that we can have all of the truly joyful pieces about food. So like workers' rights, like protests or studying like legislation around climate, food, all of the things, right? So I might study a specific region or a specific piece of legislation or arc of that. Okay, Now, when we're looking at the driving question and we're looking at the activist project, so what are students actually going to do in this unit? I think it would be really cool to publicize kind of like a cookbook. So that could be our publishing opportunity. Everyone can contribute. They can bring a family recipe and they could talk about, how are these ingredients sourced in this recipe? Where would you find them? Are the workers paid fairly? That kind of thing. And students could specialize in one kind of dynamic of this. So they could specialize in a region or a type of food. They could specialize in like a arc of justice or a specific area of justice or injustice in this. So whether it relates to the identity and kind of the airtime of this type of food, it could relate to how the ingredients are sourced or the carbon footprint of the sourcing. I don't think I said that on here, but maybe like carbon footprint of ingredients or even just like the travel of the ingredients. So the format, it could be that the cookbook is multimedia. So it could be that there's literally like a recipe and then like the narrative. It could be like a poem. It could be a story. It could be an oral kind of like audio recording or like kind of like podcast episode. It could be like a little video or documentary, right? It could take a bunch of different forms. And also part of the publishing opportunity could be like a little expo, like a tasting expo. I don't know if that's what it's called in like the real world, but I think that would be very cool. Students can co-create the content and the process with you, as well as the product. And then so for a driving question, whenever I get stuck, I like to think of, and I have this in the staff meeting agenda as well. You'll see in the slide deck that this is here, but I'm just gonna show it to you right now. Driving question frames. So if you get stuck on a question, here are some frames you can start with. So we might say, it could be something like, what would it look like if this particular dish or recipe that was created with justice in mind? It could be, what would cooking for justice look like, right? It could be, what's the formula for cooking for justice? So let's go with that one. I kind of like that one. And I think cooking for justice is part of the conversation, right? That's an actual something that we would do. So I actually might start to think about like a unit outline here. And so like my first hook lesson might be either eating food, inquiry questions about food, and or defining cooking for justice. And then we would contribute to cooking for justice definitions throughout the unit. So each time we do a build the base lesson or a case study lesson, as I call them, we would actually think about, so part of that recipe, I like that. Let's actually change that to recipe. Nice little allusion to what we're actually talking about. What's the recipe for cooking for justice? So we have all of these recipes. We have all of these lenses into justice for cooking, but then we also think about, well, as a whole, what do we need to think about? We need to think about the workers' rights. We need to think about the carbon footprint of the ingredients. We need to think about the cultural appropriation or kind of elevation of historically marginalized communities and types of food. We need to think about access for people in food deserts or experiencing food apartheid. We need to think about like all of these pieces that we talked about here. And we need to make sure that marginalized groups nationally and culturally are overrepresented in this cookbook to be able to balance and start to balance the injustices. So that would be a potential unit. This is helpful to see another example. We're going to keep doing these. Let me know what you think. If this is helpful, what would be more helpful? And also if you do this unit, oh my gosh, I would love to experience this unit. Let me know how it goes.